to Mastering Modern Selling. We're a little light today. There's two of us instead of the usual three of us. Tom is, busy closing deals or doing something important, but Carson and I are here. Carson, how you doing?
I've never been accused of being light, Brandon, but here I am.
that's fair enough. Moeed just sent me a message. Oh, he is coming. You know what? Time change. We changed our clocks, and in the UK they didn't. So he's hopping on now. He said he'll be here in a few minutes. So everybody, welcome to Mastering Modern Selling. We got a few things we can talk about anyway, Carson, right?
Yeah.
Welcome to everybody. If you're here on one of the live streams, welcome. We'd love to have you throw in the comments who you are, where you are. And as you know, we love your questions. We love your comments. We want to bring you to be part of the show as well. So please do that. And if you're on the podcast, thank you so much for joining us. And we'd really appreciate if you find value in this. We'd really appreciate the ratings. If we're worthy of 5 stars, we would really appreciate it. And if you think somebody could use it, man, screen capture that on your phone, share it with somebody, share the episode, share the show. We'd really appreciate that. So while we're waiting for Moeed to come on, poor guy, he's like, I'll be there in 5 minutes. So he's coming. Carson, tomorrow, you and I are hosting a webinar, and we are sharing your playbook that you've used to do over $1 billion, $1 billion in revenue over the last 10 years. You want to tell everybody a little bit about what they can expect, what they're going to get from you, other than kind of full open Komodo, like here's what I do on a daily basis?
Yeah, no doubt about it. So I've made no secret on this show about, how years ago I subscribed fully to the philosophy of social selling and really bet big on it, how to leverage social, but also how to gamify the sales approach. When you think about it, it is a game of law of averages. It's a game of probability and odds. We're dealt a hand like you're playing cards, but on the same token, it's what you make of what you're dealt. And so how to map out your business, how to figure out the key relationships that you need and to go get it, what you can control, what are the variables and the parameters. And when inevitably things change, how do you adapt and pivot in the light of that? So we're going to talk a lot about how to prepare, how to set the foundation for a successful year, the difference that mindset means in that, how to uncover and address your total addressable market, how to also think about executing and constructing what we like to call plays, but making them really meaningful. And especially when and when you agree that something is important to resonate with your customers, how you do it year round, not just once. It's not just one email and you pat yourself on the back. How do you really personify and execute these plays to perfection consistently over time? And then finally, how do you stay top of mind with your target customer? How do you engage them uniquely over time? How do you build community around what you do? We'll talk about all of those things, but I feel like the last 10 years, Brandon, have been building up to this day. Like, I feel like this is the pinnacle. So I'm really excited about tomorrow's session.
Yeah, me too. And I've obviously had a sneak peek and have known your playbook, but got into the weeds of it. And the way that I see it, and we haven't shared this actually with you yet, Carson. So I saw it broken down into there's kind of 3 categories of what you do. And one is the mindset, which I know is extremely important. And I don't think I've encountered a salesperson in my career that's as hard charging hustler and coming from a place of serving and his people, his customers, and collaborating and bringing community together is I've learned from you, which has been really incredible. So that first part is the mindset. And then you have a section on the tools that you use that help you be more efficient and get information out there. And then also the third one is what we call your actions. What are the activities that you actually do And where do you do them? When do you use LinkedIn? Where do you use your podcast? I know that's been a big part of you creating a reputation. I love to tell the story, and I don't mean disrespect from anybody, but when I was in St. Louis with Carson, we actually piggybacked on somebody else's lunch. They had their little buffet, and we went over and took some of the leftovers. And as we were going back to the room that we were working in, somebody came around the corner, and he was so excited. He's like, "Oh, Carson, great to see you!" And he's like, goes to shake Carson's hand. He was so excited. Carson's trying to juggle his plate and not drop his food, and shakes his hand. He's like, "Oh, Carson, da da da," and he leaves. And I said, "Oh," I said, "that was really cool, Carson. Who is that?" And he's like, I'm not sure." And again, no disrespect
It's
for the
like living a
person.
day in the life of Brandon Lee, because I know the
Oh,
same stuff happens to Brandon. But
okay.
I think the reality of this is, how you can put something in place that positively impacts and influences all the relationships you have in your life,
Yeah.
right? It's created countless revenue dollars, but at the same time, meaningful relationships like this with Brandon, where now we are friends and on a regular basis, texting each other and friendly competitions and all that jazz, a relationship that was created right here on LinkedIn. So,
Yeah. And I think the key thing for I would want people to know about, you've got your system that you use, but all of it is really geared around you've built a reputation that people know you. You're known as the number one social seller at Microsoft. But the reality is that they know you and they know you well. And so when you are sending messages, people are quicker to respond. When you do make calls, people respond because they know you. And I think in this day and age where prospecting and pipeline building is so difficult, and the traditional outreach of cold calling and cold email and cold door knocking is so challenged, that our reputation is so important. How do we go about attracting and retaining customer attention? Because they may not need us today, but they could need us in 3 months or 6 months. And are we still top of mind? Do they know who we are? Do they remember us? So that when that need arises, I need to call, I need to reach out to Carson. For any of us, do they know you and remember you, and to reach out? So I'm
and you
gonna.
never know where it's going to go. I want to piggyback on that real briefly. It's amazing to watch the evolution of a career, because as I've made moves in my career and I've gone into new roles, first off, I've come back around to be the skip level of the people supporting people that I've managed years ago as an account rep. Furthermore, there have been relationships that I built in prior iterations of my job here that now I'm able to connect those people with people that I work with in new roles. And it's that value that we're always trying to add. I like to say this a lot. It's like it started out as this tiny little snowball of believing that it was, social selling was the way to go, and it's turned into an avalanche of influence. Being able to meet people, being able to add value just by connecting people and getting out of their way so that they can do great things together. It's been very rewarding.
And that brings up a question and asks, as we're waiting for Moe to still come in. The term social selling. I've got my social selling sucks T-shirt primarily because I hated the word. I hated the term because years ago, a bunch of, and we talked about this with Mike when he was on, is he called the charlatans of social selling? Like, just do these things, we'll get 3 new leads every day, and it proved to not really work or not be as fruitful as promised. How do you talk about or define social selling?
Yeah. I mean, look, social selling is now just selling, and it's using all of the tools that are available to you that enable you to meaningfully connect with people and also stay top of mind with them. So, there's a lot of social tools, and there's some have changed over the years. There's new ones coming out all the time. There's a lot of AI infused tools now, but I think social selling, how can you leverage some of these platforms like LinkedIn to go out, find your target audience, meaningfully connect with them by commenting, by connecting, by earning meetings as a result of your connection there, and then also building a personal brand as a salesperson, as a professional, and as a thought leader. Those types of things can be infinitely impactful to your career, and you'd be surprised. I mean, it has literally catapulted me, surprisingly, throughout my time here over the last decade.
Yeah, and I would say as you talk about personal brand for everybody, it's really how are you known? It's building that reputation, and in this busy world it takes consistency, and it takes multiple even channels, but then also ways of doing it. What I like, what I see with you do, like you're a host with us on Mastering Modern Selling, you have your own show and podcast, you've got lots of content that goes out to, and you co-host other shows as well with Helka. But you have lots of content that you're sharing through lots of channels, and it's different types of content. It's not just, buy my Microsoft products. It's leadership. It's, your own personal journey as a sales guy. And I think that you've written a book and you use all that content in order to build that personal brand. And again, that is reputation. It's how you're known in the community.
I mean, and I think the key takeaway there, Brandon, is, if you're listening right now, your story matters, right? You're
Mhm.
entering the sales arena, or you're a seasoned veteran like us. Your story matters. You're having experiences that by sharing them would benefit others. And even if you have a product or service, being able to talk about how you have partnered with someone and the outcomes that they've realized as a result of your partnership, obviously with
Mhm.
their permissions, those types of things are what ultimately land the day. I go out and I try to seek, like, we talk about webinars on the show. The best webinars that I've ever done have been the ones that spotlighted customers. People don't need to hear or see me. I'm not the pro in this. I'm here to shine a light on the story of how my customer has done something great because of something that my team worked with them on.
Mhm.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what really matters. And again, it's that domino to fall. It's that snowball becoming the avalanche. You just need to build momentum. So start having these wins. And again, where I've really found success is by mastering the probability element of it. Right now I'm working with my team. I'm in a relatively new environment. For me, I made a move into a scale territory, and we're working together with going out on Sales Navigator, finding customer targets, reaching out to hundreds of executives at a time with a AI aided message that owns their website. And the goal is to get a meeting. That's it.
Mhm.
I know the value that I can bring, and I know the value my team can bring to these organizations. We want to make sure we say something that is aligned with their goals, their mission, their value statement. You do that, you earn that meeting. The rest is up to you. The tools helped you get there, but the rest is going to fall on you.
Yeah.
And so make sure you take that seriously.
And I like what you said about that too. Is I'm looking at the comments. We have Butch Nicholson who's on here, and we have Victoria Jimenez who's on here. And Butch is seasoned. He's been selling for 40 plus years. He's informed me that I can no longer call him a baby boomer. I have to call him the wise one because they're the wise era. And then you have Victoria, who is she's in an internship in her last year of college, and she's graduating in May. Congratulations, Victoria! She's going to be a guest on our show in May, right before she graduates. And what you're saying is share your story. Share what you're learning, share what you're doing, share what you're observing. It doesn't matter if you're new to sales like Victoria, or if you're Butch, who's been seasoned and did the pounding the pavement and door knocking and all that. When we share our story, that's how people begin to resonate with us, and that's the process of building our personal brand.
I want to approach Jeb's note. Jeb, thanks for joining us today. So Jeb asked, what have been the results from using AI in the prospecting messaging process? So, what's been helpful? Very, very positive. I will give you an example. So we've got a few customers, about, I'd say 30 or so, that have been completely quote unquote dark to us over the last couple of years. We've not had inroads. And, by default, when you have hundreds of customers that you manage, it's kind of challenging to get really deep with multiple executives, right? So the results have been positive, and here's why: because we infused the AI into the human touch, right? AI can never be the end all be all when it comes to messaging. But what we're doing is going in and exporting customer names and titles from Sales Navigator. Going in, you can obviously arrive at their email address any number of ways: Zoom info, doing internet searches for what their email address nomenclature is. But then what we're doing is just combing their, their mission statement, their website, their about statement, and then putting that into the AI model and really just prompting it to write a compelling message about why we would be a unique or a compelling partner based on X, Y, Z, and then pasting in that data. It's going to obviously give you a very long format. That's not what I want to send to my customer, but there will inevitably be a couple of sentences that I will extract out of that I throw into what I ultimately send to the customer. Now, the reason that this is successful is law of probability. I'm messaging 100 plus executives in one organization at the same time, and I'm also sending a very targeted message that is really geared toward how I and also our organization could uniquely help this organization and partner with them. And so that's why it resonates. And then doing it consistently over time. Of those 30, 20 have responded within an hour over the last 2 weeks. And these were customers that previously we had zero relationship with whatsoever. Yeah. So it's positive, but it's only positive not because of the AI. The AI is a time saver. I could do all this work. I could comb their websites. I could extract some pieces. But what it's doing is in seconds flat, extracting these key pieces that I can talk about why we care about these items. If they care about sustainability, if they care about diversity and inclusion, if they care about, different ways that we can work with them from a technology standpoint and digital skilling, I can reference that in my mail. That's why it works.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that actually next week for everybody that's listening. We're gonna talk a little bit more about this prospecting playbook and what it can look like to piggyback on the webinar tomorrow. Well, I think Moeed's here, and I believe what I'm going to say happened. Moeed, there you are, my friend.
How's it going, guys? Sorry about that. That was a bit of a rush.
No worries. Okay.
What I think probably happened is we changed our clocks already, and I don't think you guys changed them. So maybe that was the hiccup here.
No,
yeah, this silly thing we do about changing times.
Hey, if we're gonna do it, can't the entire world just do it on the same day? Make things a lot easier.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but luckily everything was good, so that's fine.
Thankfully, you were on LinkedIn, and Brandon was able to send you a mail. So
I know. You know what? You and I are going to connect on WhatsApp now because I was like, I don't have this cell phone.
Yeah. We'll give you. I don't know why we haven't shared that. That's so weird.
I know.
After all this time. So yeah, we'll do that after this for sure. But I'm glad to be here, and I was listening to the discussion and looking at the questions as well. Very interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff indeed.
Well, let me introduce you to everybody, and everybody. Sure. Thanks for letting Carson and I, prattle on a little bit, and we're going to deep dive more on that next week. But today, Moeed, Amin, he's you have a title. You're an enterprise account executive with SEM Rush, and you're the founder of Proverbial Door. I'll slow down a little bit. And the reason I asked Moeed, he's actually been a guest on my show before, the show I had prior to this one. He is an expert in neuroscience, and he uses all of that, applies everything he knows into sales and how people make decisions. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Moeed, welcome to the show, even if it's late. I'm so excited to have you here. Tell everybody a little bit about you and your background.
Yeah, and firstly, thank you for having me on, and it's a real pleasure to speak with you and everyone who's listening in today. So my background, I've been in sales for about 20 years, held various positions all the way to senior leadership. Decided to step back from leadership and go back into sales, along with the business that I currently have, where I'm coaching and training both salespeople as well as early stage entrepreneurs, and sometimes going into Series A. And in that time, those 20 years, I've been involved in enterprise-based selling. Some of it for low ticket items. When I say low tickets, we're talking about $20,000, all the way up to the millions. And so in that time, I have learned not just a lot about sales, but about human behavior. And it was in 2007 where I had a serendipitous moment where I realized that actually my neuroscience degree, as well as the others that I have, actually was a benefit in the sales process. And I realized that there was a massive gap in the market when it comes to this. And in fact, most salespeople have no inclination or have never been taught or even aware, at that time at least, of the importance that psychology plays in the buying process. And so what was interesting is in 2007, I then during the financial crisis was the top salesperson in that company of about 200 odd salespeople, I think, at the time. And that's just in Europe, not including Americas and other parts of the world. And that was really through just the understanding of neuroscience and what kind of makes buyers tick, and what are the emotions and the thought process that they go through at every stage of the buying process. And so that led me into a lifelong journey of kind of using what I've learned to actually aid in not only my sales approach, but help a very large number of salespeople really kind of excel in their sales career and just completely open their perspective into sales, right? And what it takes to be a great salesperson. It unfortunately is still the case. It is not what's being taught. That doesn't mean that it's all bad, of course not. But it has to be slotted into the right perspective and the right context, and therefore have the right understanding. So yeah, that's my long ramble about my past and kind of what I've learned along the way. And I've had the privilege of being able to work with so many people and really kind of open their eyes around this. So yeah, that's how we kind of connected, I think, through a particular network as well.
Yeah, and it reminds me, a life-changing situation for me was my freshman year of college. And Henry Kravitz, who's one of the founders of Kohlberg Kravis and Roberts and KKR, spoke at our school. I went to a small private college, and the KKR guys all went to my private college. And he was there speaking, and somebody asked him about, what should we be focused on as undergraduates? And he said, they hire people from the best MBA programs around the world. And he said one of the biggest challenges they had is their ability to communicate. They were smart as can be, but their ability to communicate, their ability to understand people. And he said, if you can understand people and how they think and how they behave, that's more important than all the book knowledge you get. And I shifted my undergraduate degree to psychology and communication because that. Plus, I was dying in the economics courses, but so there was a little other motivation there. But that really did. What's that?
I can relate to that.
Yeah. And that's what shifted. So Moeed, as we start talking about this, can you share a little bit about that, the science backed on how people make decisions?
Yeah, so that's a really big topic, and so let me distill that into four main pillars that are particularly relevant in the sales process. And so the first one is the analysis and calculation of external information. So when we go to make a decision, that ability to make decision doesn't just come from within. There's external information, feedback, analysis about the world around us that goes into forming what decisions should we make here. So the kind of assessment and calculation of external information is the first bit. The second bit is assessing gains and losses. And what I have to say here is for salespeople, not enough attention is being paid into the losses part, but that is a critical component of how we make decisions. The final part is something called, well, not final, the third part is called plan implementation. Plan implementation is essentially, how would this become a part of my world? If I buy something, how will that become a part of my life and my world? Whether it's clothes, whether it's a phone, whether it's a piece of software, whether it's the person you marry, right? It's how will that become part of my world, and what would that look like? And then the final part is when you go to pursue a goal or pursue an action. And there are four parts of the brain that's involved, main parts of the brain that are involved, two of which are emotional centers. The last part is actually how you calculate whether you should pursue a goal or not. and it's in a portion of the brain called the orbitofrontal lobe. And the reason why I bring this up above all others is if you want proof of how important emotions are in the decision-making process, all you have to do is look at the orbitofrontal lobe. If that part of the brain essentially helps you make decisions. And the way it makes decisions is it measures what is my emotional state right now, and what will my emotional state be when I achieve that goal or pursue that action. The difference determines whether you take that decision or not. And here is why emotions are so important. If that part of the brain is damaged, in patients, what we see is complete apathy. They cannot make the simplest decisions, such as drinking a glass of water, or putting on a jumper, or getting up to go to the door. They can't make any of those simplest decisions. And what's interesting is that happens when that part of the brain has been damaged. So emotions and our ability to measure the difference in emotions between now and when we pursue an action is critical to us making a decision and taking action on that decision. So those are the kind of 4 parts. We can go into that in more detail, into each one of those 4 if you want, but those are the 4 things. So calculating and evaluating external information, assessing gains and losses, plan implementation, and then the 4 parts of the brain that are involved in the pursuit of a goal or an action.
Moeed, I'm fascinated by the science of sales. I'd be curious, just especially for our audience listening today, a lot of modern sellers, what would you say are some common misconceptions or approaches about sales today that maybe your science-based approach seeks to debunk, or that you have a different take on it than maybe what has been the norm?
Yeah, really good question, and there are actually quite a bit. There's quite a lot here. So let's start with the first one, which is, and my old mentor Matthew Dixon wrote this in his recent book, The Jolt Effect.
You love Matt.
I was just going to bring that up.
I just made a post about him yesterday. He was on a prior show. Love that it all comes back to Challenger Sale and Jolt Effect.
Yeah, well, he was an old mentor of mine, and the research I've done. So I've interviewed, how many is it now? 480. I can't remember the exact number now, but it's 480 odd B2B buyers, something like that, over the last 15 years. So the first thing is that there's a point in a decision-making process where you know the benefits, right? You know the potential value. In fact, we wouldn't be at this advanced stage in the sales process unless that has been agreed, unless we know that, right? We're just not going to waste our time anymore, especially senior people. Now, there's a point there where they need to have confirmation of that value, right? That's fine. That's understandable. But one of the other things that are often missed is, what do I stand to lose from this right now? So the area of risk and risk management, and not just risk management, but surfacing the risks, having an open conversation about it, because we as salespeople shy away from risks. We think, well, if we bring this up, then we've somehow put in their brain something that they weren't thinking about before. It's totally untrue. They're thinking about it from the very beginning. You not bringing it up means that means a few things. Number one is that you're not in sync with how they're making decisions. You're not in sync with their psychology at that stage. So there's a dissonance there. And with that dissonance comes distance. The second thing is that without you bring it up, the buyer feels as if you're trying to hide something. And that, again, creates distance. So be very clear about what the risks are for the buyer. And sometimes those risks aren't just, the downsides of using us versus someone else. Sometimes the risks are things like, I don't know what to expect if we sign on the dotted line with you. And if I don't know what to expect, i.e. that plan implementation side, if I don't have a vision of service, if I don't know what those stages are, if I don't know what my team's responsibilities are versus yours, if that hasn't been mapped out, then I'm going to get nervous, because in the absence of information, the brain defaults to the negative, i.e. it will remove itself from the potential risk. right? Just the sheer fact of just there's a gap there, there's some ambiguity. I'm just going to distance myself from that because we're wired to protect ourselves from ambiguity. So that's one thing. The other thing is business value versus what I term emotional value. There was a study done by Google, Matista, and CEB about this, and we found that B2B sales has emotional value, what they call personal value, I call it emotional value, has twice the impact of business value. I.e., there's a point where the ROI might be clear, the benefits might be there, but in order for me to want to push this through, particularly when I'm facing challenges or pushback or skepticism from my boss and my stakeholders, me having personal or emotional value in this and seeing that for myself and my team will give me more courage to present that case and to stand my ground when the CFO is going to really challenge me on whether we should do this or not. So that's the other one. The next thing is that, so this is related to risk. So one of the biggest surprises for me, it was a surprise how big this was. When we dug into why someone made a decision to go with one provider over another, the overwhelming majority wasn't innovation. It wasn't ROI, actually. It wasn't that you're a better solution. It was kind of tied to the sales experience, which CEB found, but I went even further because to me, sales experience, what does that even mean, right? I mean, is it just a great conversation? Is it the fact that I trust this person? And so I dug further. And what I found was that the overwhelming majority of reasons why someone made a decision to go with one vendor over another was protection or elevation of their career. If I went with this vendor, how would that impact my career? And my career might be all about stability. That's kind of what I've been brought in, or that's what the CEO is expecting of me, whatever it might be, is to steady the ship, don't take any risks, grow a little bit, right, in terms of innovation and products and the way we do things, but do it safely, right? Versus someone may be coming in here, may be brought in to shake things up, right? The company, the investors, they had enough. They brought someone in to basically say, right, we're just going to strip things out or change the way we do things in a radical way because, quite frankly, we've hit that critical mass. So whatever the decision was, it really came down to, is this person going to protect and or elevate my career, or are they going to harm my career? And I don't care how much better this vendor is or how many accolades their software has. If I feel that another software or another solution presents a safer alternative for me, then I will choose that. So that was another surprising one. So those are just a few of quite a lot of things that we uncovered. The area about emotion is something I just cannot stress enough. I cannot stress that enough. The other one is passion in your voice is a really big no-no. So we're taught that if we are passionate, and we have to sound passionate, we have to. Don't take what I'm doing here as an indicator because we're in a podcast show, very different mode of communication here. But in a sales process, if you sound overly enthusiastic and overly passionate, what was really surprising is that triggers a safety response in the buyer. It's too much emotion, right? What is this person standing to gain from this? Why is this person so excited, right? It doesn't give off a feeling of professionalism. It actually gives off a feeling of immaturity. Whereas someone who, and I'm not saying you have to be monotonous and boring, no. But what I'm saying is, if you come across as dependable, professional in your approach, analytical in a lot of ways, don't be overly enthusiastic. Be enthusiastic about them, but do so in a measured way. Because if you're too enthusiastic, then someone will think, well, hang on a second, what's going on here? So that was another very surprising one. Professionalism over enthusiasm, right? Those are the things I would say.
Yeah, so I'm hearing Matt when he was on here, and we spent a lot of time talking about the FOMO versus the FOMO,
Yeah,
and how
yeah.
much the fear of messing up dominated. All that to be said, then, how does this transition as we talk about modern? How is personal brand contributing to this? Because it seems to me, and Carson and I have talked a lot about this, your reputation over time impacts whether they want to talk to you in the first place, but then also like the tone, it kind of sets the table for that conversation. And then, Anthony, I want to get to your question. We'll find the right time to bring it in for Moeed.
Yeah. Personal brand. At the end of the day, I'm not going to go into the history of commerce and sales and things like that, because that would be a 5-hour discussion, right? And that's something I do at universities or special seminars that I host. But let me give an understanding, let me give a description of where we are right now when it comes to, particularly when you're selling to senior level people. It doesn't mean that's not the case with more junior people. It's just a bit more pronounced with senior people. They don't want you to come to them with data or insights because they can get that. They don't want you to come to them with an idea because they probably have a lot of ideas. What they want you to come to them with is a solution. It's what I term this a hypothesis, but they want you to not only agree or empathize or identify an unforeseen situation, right, or unforeseen risk, but they want you to come with some form of an answer, right? And now that answer doesn't have to be concrete, it doesn't have to be totally mapped out, it doesn't have to be exact, but it is a directional answer. And so what does that mean to your personal brand? Well, you've got to be someone that's able to deliver on that answer. You've got to be able to, you've got to show them that you're someone that understands their business and their world, right? And I don't mean just their business. I mean the industry in which they're working within, the company and what's going on in that business. What are the typical MBOs, right? And the objectives that buyer has to go through, right? And has to deliver on, right? You've got to understand those things. And then when you have all that information, your personal brand is now an extension of that. It's a demonstration of that. And so if you're talking on LinkedIn about things to do with your product, yeah, it's okay. If you're talking about how great you are at sales, forget it, right? Which I still see a lot of salespeople do. But if you're talking about the updated trends, the best practices, what are you seeing that CTOs are generally doing at the moment? What are some of the pros and cons? What are some of the risks involved? What are some of the dangers involved? Currently right now, with CMOs, I think there was a study done by Gartner where they found that 59% of CMOs were actually disappointed by the results from the investments they made in data and analytics. Okay. Well, what is your idea about how some of the best CMOs are handling that situation? Right? And why is that the best idea? In other words, you're helping them learn. And learning, when you acquire information, the brain registers, it uses the same reward mechanisms for acquiring new and interesting, so that's subjective, but interesting information. It's the same reward pathways when you eat sugar. It's highly desirable. And it's highly desirable because added information was actually the very, very root of our separation from Neanderthals. And that's why Homo sapiens, one of the theories, strong theories and reasons why Homo sapiens survived. So new information is highly desirable for us. And so what information are you sharing that's of interest to your buyer and their world, not what's interesting to you or about your product? And so your personal brand is the extension of your knowledge. It's the extension of the results that you've delivered for others. This is one of the levers that you use to not only communicate, but show that you are at the same level as the buyer. one of the things that I learned in CEB that was hugely valuable for me was that I was having more discussions with, at the time I was selling to chief R&D officers. In my opinion, one of the hardest people to sell to. I spoke to more chief R&D officers in 1 week than those chief R&D officers would speak to other chief R&D officers in a year. And so within a month, within 6 months, within a year, I built up such a wealth of knowledge of what some of the best practices are out there, but also some of the dangerous practices. And just me sharing that kind of information, I realized was hugely valuable to those people that I was speaking with. They really valued those insights. And so salespeople have this inferiority complex, but actually just by the sheer volume of calls and discussions that you have, the amount of knowledge that you have is actually really valuable to those buyers. And so again, that is a part of your brand extension as well. So personal brand is important. And the reason why is because it goes back to the fact that they're doing business with you, not just your company. And if it's a complex solution, they need to know that the person they're dealing with has the professionalism, the stability, and the confidence and the experience to navigate them through that. The more complex the deal, the greater the consequences of the decisions and the solution that you bring to their business. Therefore, you need to show yourself as, in my opinion, having a higher brand than the company that you're working with. That's what you're striving for. So personal brand is incredibly important in this process because you're the very tip end of that spear behind your company. So I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, there's a lot that I can share there, but hopefully I've put some salient points there.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Carson, I have a question for you. We was talking about there with the personal brand and that reputation. How does that practically play out for you with what you do with your content creation, your webinars, your podcasts, the type of content you create? You share it, you send direct messages. When you and I first connected, we talked about how you leveraged the 9-figure deal and how you had this swarm approach and working with people. How does what Moeed was just saying, how does that play out for you practically day in and day out?
There's so much that Moeed has shared today that I think is so relevant. And it actually, the biggest thing that I think I want to really anchor on from today's session is the whole de-risking the decision for your customer audience. And if you leverage that to inform how you go about your go-to-market strategy, it makes all the difference in the world. And what I mean by that is, I spend a lot of time really thinking about, okay, what's the problem or the challenge or the gap that I typically see when I talk to different executive leaders, right? And then how can maybe I help them uniquely solve it? It's not about talking about a product or a solution. It could be a relationship that I help create. It could be finding someone that person serves in a community or a different customer organization that maybe I've supported or one of my colleagues supports. How can I meaningfully show up in a way that helps them feel good about working together? And I think it really embodies what Moeed was saying earlier, because that is at the heart of everything that I seek to do. How can I show up in a way that it shows that, first off, I'm paying attention. I know what matters to them based on their company reports, their website, et cetera, and even their own LinkedIn profile. Like, I've forged relationships based on what I could tell matters to that person individually. A customer that wouldn't respond to my team, but when I reached out to them and I saw on LinkedIn, they were on podcasts and blogs and they had a thought leadership around a certain topic. Guess what? That's where I tried to show up. Clearly, you're a thought leader here. We could learn a lot from you. Let me connect you with some other people in my organization that care deeply about what you're talking about so that we can learn from you. They responded in 5 minutes and nobody could get a meeting with this person. So I think the point of the matter is that there's no cookie cutter program. There's no silver bullet. But if you think about what matters to your target audience, you understand what their gaps look like, and you don't go toe to toe on the strengths of their way of doing things. Like, you're never going to win if you go against your competition based on your competition strength. That's just not going to happen. But if you can make them feel good about what you can bring and what your organization can bring in the way of partnership, that is key. Now, the other element from a branding perspective, building that reputation that you're an important person to know as part of a process. You know, Brandon, you talked about the 9-figure deal. That customer had seven C-level changes in 2 years. Every time they had a new C-level, they were told, you need to meet Carson because he's going to read you in on what we're doing. That's the value that I was working diligently to bring. I am obsessed with finding ways to serve through value. And by having these relationships and knowing what we were doing, I was able to onboard, in essence, these executives and say, and make them feel good. This is what we're doing. What is your unique vantage point? What's your charter? You know, obviously you came to the organization to do something important. You know, how can I make sure I'm delivering a win to you? Because at the end of the day, if you make everybody in your sphere win, guess what? You're going to win too. So whether it's passively educating the masses so that you de-risk the decision for them, you make sure that you're helping them take in information on their own terms, not being pushy. You're always available. You're responsive. You show up and you look for ways proactively to uniquely help them. You can't lose.
Moeed, back to you.
You've got me fired up. Moeed, it's funny because I had a bunch of questions I was going to ask, and you kind of answered a lot of them in your last bit. You know, really about some of the experiences that you've had, how you've applied the neuroscience approach. But I'd be very interested to hear, how do you see things continuing to evolve? You know, especially now with, you know, the role of digital channels, LinkedIn, you know, the evolution of B2B sales prospecting, how we're using AI. How could and should a science-based approach play in modern selling and the future of sales?
Just a small question.
Yeah, that's a big question, but I'm like,
yeah, you guys are asking me big questions, man. I mean,
I feel like you got this crystal ball. Well, I want to know.
Hey, we brought your big brain here for a reason. We have big questions.
Right. Tap
That's very kind of you. That's very kind of you guys. Let's start with the first bit. Okay, so the way I'm a very visual person. So the way I envision this is, imagine there's a core. That's you. That's your knowledge, your capabilities, your application of things. And then you have another circle around you, and then maybe a third circle or a second circle around you. That's where AI and digital play. They are tools. They are channels. Think of them as the runway for you to get to a destination. But the core doesn't change. Not really, right? There might be some nuanced elements about the core that changes with time, but really that's kind of stayed true for a very, very long time. And so let me address those core first, because your question is a fantastic one, Carson, because we are going into the situation with AI. And in fact, I've created courses on that. I've done that with a good friend of mine, Fred Copestake. And so I recognize the importance. I use AI obsessively throughout the day. But people jump into AI and LinkedIn and all these nuanced techniques and approaches. But actually, there are some fundamentals that they don't have. And that's what's failing them, not the fact that they can't use AI or digital or LinkedIn in the right way. So if you don't mind, let me start from there first, because there's some really important things. First one is you're not a salesperson. You're a business person. You just happen to sell something. So let me repeat that. You're a business person who happens to be selling something. It was Warren Buffett that said that finance is the language of business. Right. So if you don't understand finance, you really can't speak the language of business. And especially when you're selling to a C-level person or even a VP for that matter. Like when I say VP, I mean a real VP, not, and I don't mean to be bad to other people, a VP of sales or something like that, where it's just a glorified senior title, but actually that person doesn't really have P&L responsibility. So I'm talking about people that have P&L responsibility, not just the budget. If you can't understand what they're going through financially and how that underpins the decisions they make, if you don't understand the difference between CapEx and OpEx, if you don't understand the difference between things like accounts receivables and things like that, then you're not going to be able to understand what's moving and shaking their business and what's driving the decisions that they're making. And so I mean, on my YouTube channel, there are, I think, something like almost 100 videos of different companies that we've analyzed their financial statements to help people understand, how do you read financial statements? What insights and inferences can you draw from that? I've seen too many salespeople just rock up and basically say, this should be important to you. But if they took just one quick look at the financial statement, you can see that that absolutely is not the case. Or even if it is important to them, they're assuming it's important because the training told them that the application of this is here. But actually, if they read their financial statement, it is important to them, but it applies in this area. This is why that's important. So that's one fundamental that I think really people need to understand. The second thing is you've got to understand the MBOs of your buyers. What I mean by MBOs is management by objectives. These are the KPIs, metrics, objectives that determines if they've done a good job. So as a CTO or a CMO, your objective for this year is to do these 4 things. And by the way, those 4 things aren't created equal. This one has a weighting of 40%. This one has a weighting of 20%, right? Whatever. So when people talk about innovation, for example, and innovation is a part of that C-levels person's role, most of the time, it will feature no more than 10% of their MBOs. So you're playing with something that actually is the lowest value for them, right? So that's the other thing. The other thing you need to know is the industry. What is the industry they're playing in? Because those are the forces that impact what they're doing. If you don't know that the industry is growing at a compound annual growth rate of 10%, but they're growing at a compound annual growth rate of only 5%, that means they're underperforming their industry, right? That's important to know. You've got to know where the substitutes are coming through. You've got to know where the threats are. You've got to know how strong their suppliers are, how strong the buyers are. All of those things has an impact on the fundamental decisions that they need to make in their business. So there are some fundamental core elements that I absolutely and really strongly recommend that salespeople, if you want to be the successful salesperson of the future, those core things are even more important. The good news is that if you do that, you're actually in the top percentile, because unfortunately there are too many salespeople with even 20 years of experience that don't have that knowledge. So let's go into AI and digital. These are tools. These are the extension of your core, the extension of your approach. These are the mechanisms that you use to be able to communicate for LinkedIn, for example, it's an incredible communicator. For you to have to do and develop your brand and broadcast your brand before social media, it was incredibly difficult. If you're old enough like I am, you will know how difficult that was. Incredibly hard to get a book published, and expensive. And let me tell you something, you got to know the right people, right? Mm-hmm. It was just not an area that was open for you. So social media has democratized our ability to communicate our value, which is incredible. And so LinkedIn, and let's use LinkedIn for an example. LinkedIn is the channel by which you extend that brand, that communication, the thoughts that you're sharing. But you've also got to know the room in which you're playing, right? So the paradigm of that room. You don't post in the same way on LinkedIn as you would on Facebook or Instagram, right? There is a micro culture within that social media platform, and that's the paradigm that you need to adhere to. And so LinkedIn has the same. Now, the reason why I say that is you can't treat LinkedIn in the same way that you treat cold calling or email. Right? It just doesn't work, because the people that are The buyers there are not there for that reason. That's not the mode of communication. They're there for something else. So you need to slot yourself in within that place, right? The future now for sales is that gone are the days where you can use your gravitas and relationship and your personality to break down doors. Those days are gone. If you're not a tech-powered salesperson, you're going to be left behind at an astonishingly fast rate, just by the exponential curve of how technology is being taken up. And so if we look at AI does a few things that if you don't get on top of it, you're going to find yourself left behind by someone who's mediocre, who happens to know how to use AI really well. AI.
I'm that mediocre guy that's going to pass you
Sorry?
if you don't. I'm that mediocre guy that's going to pass you if you don't.
When I say mediocre, I'm only doing that to hit the mark home. But actually, that person using AI to then become excellent, you're not mediocre anymore. You're using tools that helps you advance more than anyone else. And so there are so many things that AI can do. I mean, it's just astounding. But I'll run off a few of them. Number one is you can save a huge amount of time. You can collapse 30 hours into 30 minutes worth of research. Right? I'm just use those numbers just to kind of hit home the extent by which you can do that. You can do role playing with using AI. You can actually figure out what the type of buyer is and what the psychological processes they're going through at each stage. You can figure that out. You can figure out what a lookalike company is. You can input information about that company and basically say, given all this information and the fact that inflation has now dropped to 3.4% as it has in the UK over this period of time, this CAGR, this information about this particular company, these types of, you can put all that information and basically say, tell me what's going on. What are your theories about what's going on in this company? Now, for you to have to do that, when I showed this to my father, who ran industrial manufacturing businesses, etc., back in the 80s and 90s, he would have to hire a team in India to do that at a very large price. He looked at that and basically said, oh, wow, I wouldn't need any of those people anymore. I wouldn't need those 20, 25 people that are hired as research analysts to constantly scan the market and build theories and hypotheses of what we need to do. You don't need that. That's how powerful this is. There are so many ways that you can apply AI, not just in my view, the basic, generate this email for me, although that in itself can be very powerful. I have a colleague with ADHD, and he absolutely relies on Gemini and ChatGPT. It's given him such a leg up. So going forward, and by the way, it can help you, as long as you put the right inputs, it can help you build an incredibly strong hypothesis. I figured out using it, I figured out the ingredients to an ROI calculator for some of our products that far exceeds what we had before. And so it's just an incredibly intelligent tool at your fingertips that you need to know how to use. But it's changed it. I mean, to answer your question in a nutshell, it's changed the game in so many different ways. You've got to be able to know how to use those technologies, because if you don't, you're going to be left behind really, really quickly. And that can be very scary for a lot of salespeople. My advice is pick one or two things and just get better at those one or two things. You don't need to know how to use every technology stack at a maturity level 5. But pick one or two that are critical that you need to get to a 4 or 5. AI, I would say, is one of the most important ones that you need to get to a level 4 or 5 as fast as you can.
I can't wait to listen back to this one, Brandon.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same.
The number of quotables, how important AI is, how important it is to understand the risk to your customer, how not adopting some of this technology is going to leave you behind. Sellers everywhere, this episode is gold.
Yeah. And a lot of, even on the practical side, right? Because we talk about modern selling and we talk a lot about LinkedIn, we get the base questions of, well, and you hit it earlier. We hear a lot of people say, oh, we tried LinkedIn and it didn't work. Great. How did you use LinkedIn? And often they used it like a different channel. They used it like a call. They used it like the phone. They use it like email. and they say, oh, it didn't work. And their tendency is they want to throw the whole thing out. But what you're talking about is leveraging this tool, but you got to get the core right. And too often the core isn't right. And we came out of an era where, and you hit on it, personality, charisma could get the door open, primarily because buyers needed information. So your charisma, everything would get the door open, then you get in the room, and then you had the opportunity to sell. Well, if that charisma is not opening the door for you, because the way the buyers are looking at it is, what do I see? And this is where personal brand for me is so important. What are you posting? What are you commenting? How are you adding to conversations? That's what gets people to stand out. That's what gets a buyer's attention. It's really the substance of what you're doing, not just where you're doing it. And LinkedIn is that 24/7, 365 platform when used properly, but you got to get that core correct.
Yeah. And one point to make about LinkedIn is people will say, I can't follow everyone that I'm trying to sell to, or that's in my business, in my list of businesses. And my answer to them is, well, don't try.
Right.
LinkedIn is a strategy that I would say is for your top 20 accounts, or top 20 people. It's not something that you would use if you have a large book of business. It's not something you should use for the others. So
unless you're completely insane like me.
I mean,
no, and I think there is like a plan B, if you will, which is go after your top 20 accounts, yes, but then also you can look at who's influencing your industry.
Yes.
Right? Who's creating that content consistently? Because we know that, I think the number is still 2% of people on LinkedIn consistently create and share content. So we hear a lot of times, oh, my people don't publish. Well, so what? Most people don't publish, but who are they paying attention to?
Right.
Go talk to them, go engage with them, go get in front of them. And it's not difficult. You just have to take the time to show up and have your core right. So when you are there and you are having a conversation, you're not saying, great post, I want to share this. You're actually contributing and you're learning. And that's where that, I think, getting back to the core. And then some of those specific tactics make a lot of sense and they add value.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. I mean, it's a slower burn, but it has a higher impact, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so you've got to know how to use it. Yeah.
Yeah. We're pushing time. So Moeed, will you come back? Number one, because I think we want to keep going on this. So we'll get you scheduled sometime in the future to come back.
For sure.
And I kept saying we were going to answer questions. So let's put a couple of them up just so we don't short sheet the audience here. I like Victoria's most recent question. Let's start there and then we can work backwards, Nor. So Moeed, I think you can read it there, but what would you say is the best way to know whether you're at a 4 or 5 with how quickly AI is adapting and evolving?
So I initially read that question as, what's the best way to know whether I'm at a 4 or 5? Okay, so with how quickly AI is adapting and evolving. All right, okay. So the 4 or 5 is not your proficiency in knowledge of AI. It's your proficiency in using AI for your sales process. So sometimes AI will adapt in specific ways that just isn't really relevant to your sales process. So think of it, don't get too scared by how AI is evolving rapidly. It's going to evolve very fast. And most of that involvement is it's becoming more intelligent, right? But of course, there are other things that are involved, such as Leonardo.ai, et cetera, where it's involved in images and videos and things like that. So how would you know you're at 4 or 5? Well, the good news is that I have a map for that on what's a 1 versus a 5. The way I would, without being if you don't need to be too scientific about what's a 4 versus a 5, what I would ask yourself is, firstly, do I understand the fundamental things? Do I use it to understand the fundamental things I need to about the business that I'm trying to sell our solution to? So do I use it for my research purposes, for example? Do I use it to help me analyze the transcripts from this company's recent financial webinar, financial statement? Do I use it to, here's another example. Do I use it to basically say, input details about what my product is, what my solution is? Have I asked it to tell me what are the pros and cons from the buyer's perspective about my product? What questions would they be asking about a solution like mine? Why would they decide to go to someone else? Like, what would be the overriding reason for them to do so? What are they skeptical about a solution like ours? Why would they be? Right? So just understand. Don't think about getting to level 4 and 5. I know I talked about level 4 and 5, but let me just make it really easy for you. Number one is, how is my solution perceived amongst buyers from the buyer's perspective? So ask the AI to act like a CTO or CMO, whatever it is. I'm presenting this solution to you. Tell me all the reasons why you would love it, all the reasons why all the things about it you'd be neutral, and what are the things that you'd be highly skeptical about or be very, very wary of, and why. That's the first thing that you can ask it, right? And really try to understand, because these are things that your buyers are not going to necessarily tell you, but they're absolutely thinking is what's driving their decision. That's the first thing. Second thing is, you can help it to conduct role plays. So if you have a very important sales conversation coming up, right, and it's a large deal for you, you can run the role play. You can ask it to play the role of the buyer and say, I'm gonna inject some statements here to you. I want you to respond as if you are the buyer, right? And obviously, the more information you give about the buyer, the more realistic that AI is going to be able to respond to in that role play. So that's another example. So use it in the form of research, buyer understanding, in the moment sales coaching, right, and testing of theories, right? Use it to that effect, or for example, you're gonna send out an email, or you want to send out an email about something. Ask the AI to suggest the email for you, right, and describe what it is that you want to do with that email. Just think of it as your personal Albert Einstein. In fact, even smarter than that, way smarter than that, but next to you. We've all been there where we said, you know what, gosh, I wish I could ask someone how would I do something like this? Well, you do have someone. That's the beauty. Now, it may not be 100% accurate, of course not, but it's way better than if you try to figure it out yourself, and it will take days.
And way faster. Yeah.
Way faster. I mean, it literally collapses time. And so the way I would get to level 4 and 5 is those three things: research, buyer understanding, and sales applications, right? So role plays, scenario planning, structuring of emails, even structuring of proposals sometimes, right? And so that's how I would start to use it and get familiar with it as quickly as possible.
Well, Anthony, I am going to ask Moeed to come into the comments and respond to your question there. We're way over time, but Moeed, I'm sure will be willing to go in and answer that question for you later.
I can answer that question really quickly now, very quickly, which is distrust creates distance. So the further you are between you and the buyer feels how far you are from them, then it doesn't really matter whether it's distrust. It can be multiple other things, but what you're trying to do is create that mental and emotional connection, right? So distrust is one way of creating distance, but distance is something that's the enemy. That's where ghosting happens and things like that.
Yeah.
If you're keeping a tally at home, which I know you are, this just became the longest episode yet. So, and chock full of goodies. Like I said, I can't wait to go back and mine the video and transcript for some quotables.
Well, and Nor just messaged us that we have our most views, live views from X and YouTube ever. So there we go. Well, Moeed, I would imagine there's going to be a lot of people that want to reach out and connect with you. What is the best way for people to find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn's the best way. So /Moeed Amin. And hit me up, ask me any questions you have, give me some observations, disagree with me if you want, no problem. I love that, because that allows dialogue, and I actually learn through those disagreements as well. So
I'm always
feel
scared to
free.
disagree with you.
Really? Why?
I'm
No,
just
come
kidding.
on. I love the
No,
discussion.
we've had great conversations.
Yeah,
That's why I want
exactly.
you back. So,
But yeah, LinkedIn's the best
excellent.
way. And you can go to if you really want to build your business acumen and be able to read financial statements and understand what you can learn about companies from their financial statements, then go to the YouTube channel at Proverbial Door. I think there's almost like 100 companies that my colleague and I have analyzed, who are public businesses and some private as well.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, this was excellent. Reminder for everybody, Carson and I are leading that webinar tomorrow, where Carson's going to share his playbook. I think some of the nuggets that we talked about today are probably going to find their way into the discussion to explain some of the things that Carson does in his playbook. Where we are, there's probably a link to it in the comments. And if you find a link, make sure you find mine, not Carson's, because we got a competition going on who's driving the most registrations. And Carson has me beat by about 9 at the moment.
And trust me, Brandon needs all the help he can get. So please click on Brandon's
I
link.
love it. Well, Carson, you want to wrap us up and send us on home?
Absolutely. Moeed, thank you. This was
pleasure.
amazing. Really excited to get you back on too. And until next time, everyone, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.